But how did you react when she first came to you with the idea that she wanted to film what you did and let the world know?
Whoa! Me? Far out. Hello, I am Wavy Gravy, hippie icon, flower geezer, and temple of accumulated error. And this is my pal, my pet fish, Saul Bass. And I did that even though my bass, no bass kissing usually, but because Saul sniffs dogs' butts.
My name is Michelle Esrick, and I'm the director and producer of Saint Misbehavin, the Wavy Gravy movie. So there was for me, sort of two things happening. One was hearing these incredible stories of his life and him being at all these seminal moments, and living with Bob Dylan and Above the Gaslight, and Dylan writing Hard Rain's Gonna Fall on his typewriter, and Lenny Bruce being his manager, and the real story from his and the commune, his commune, the Hog Farm's perspective of setting up the free kitchen at Woodstock, and really sort of setting a tone for a lot of the magic that happened at Woodstock, where people were taking care of each other, and getting that a different perspective of like what made it such a magical moment in time that we're still talking about. I mean, the stories just, they were endless, and I was thinking, how come everybody doesn't know about this guy? And I started thinking about there should be a movie about this guy. You know, sometimes you meet people and you think, God, there should be a movie about this person. Everybody should know this person. But this other sort of level or thing that was happening internally to me is every time I was around him, I had a shift. I noticed that my perception shifted, sort of went like this, for the better. It was like, I felt a little, my spirit was lifted. I felt I got a better smile. I was seeing, it's like putting a pair of glasses on where everything looked a little better. And so I noticed this, but I also noticed that other people's light was getting turned on. And I love music and poetry and creativity, and Wavy uses all of that to lift people up. He just really inspired me, and I wanted to share that. I wanted to really share that. And I wanted people to know who he really was. I wanted people to know that he was more than the guy from Woodstock. He was more than Ben & Jerry's ice cream flavor. He had lived a whole life of service. I mean, an entire life of service.
I do lots of benefits for folks other than SEVA or Camp Winter Rainbow, but SEVA is my true cause. I was a founding member. SEVA is a Sanskrit word that means service to humankind, and we work in curable and preventable blindness in third world countries, as 80% of the people in the world that are blind actually don't need to be blind and can get their sight back for about $50. We've helped with over 2 million sight-saving operations. Remember the first concert I did, we had just been given our marching orders by this amazing woman, Nicole Grasset, who headed up the smallpox eradication program in India and Southeast Asia. And my job was to put on a concert, sing out for sight. And I got in the aircraft, and who else was on the aircraft was the Grateful Dead. And they were sitting dead. I mean, ducks. I mean, what could they do? They couldn't jump out of the plane. The next thing you know, we're doing the concert at the Oakland Kaiser Auditorium, and Bill Graham didn't even know it was a benefit. He said, "Why am I the last to hear about these things?" But then I was sitting backstage, and Bill slipped me this note, and I opened it up, and it was a check for $10,000 for Seva. I said, "Bill, why are you doing this?" He said, "Because you did not hit on me, my friend." So that was the beginning.
Yeah, so I wanted people to know him, and my intention was that that was the best way that I could be an activist and help the world, was to put Wavy Gravy on a screen and put him in front of everybody. I started shooting him in 1999, which was Woodstock 99, the third Woodstock. And I live in New York City. Wavy lives in Berkeley, California, and so it was over a period of 10 years that I worked on this film.
After the third year, the rest was gravy. It was kind of a little odd to start with, but you know, I think I broke in after the third year, and it just, the beat went on. It was what it was. And when they weren't there and I was doing something astounding, she'd say, just a minute, and she'd get a plane, and a few hours later she'd be there with a camera crew. But I guess my favorite moment was when the camera crew came creeping into our room at midnight when my wife and I were in bed watching Jon Stewart. And it was just a sweet moment, because it was something that we did every night, watch Jon Stewart and Stephen Colbert, because especially if it's a rough day, you get a few laughs at the end of the night, and you go to bed with that outlook, rather than, oh, the horror.
The message is timeless. It's about Wavy, but the true star of the film is the message. It's what he represents. That's what draws people to him. It's what he represents. It's the messages that he transmits. Just done 16 film festivals, and people feel inspired. Like, it worked. My intention, my dream, worked. So after you see the film, people feel this. They feel affirmed. They feel affirmed that we can do it. We can make a difference. And he reflects. He reflects something back to you. Right. So like, I got a letter from this 15-year-old girl, and she said, my parents always dragged me to these movies about these great people, about saints, you know. And she said I always walk away feeling like a loser. And she said, but when I saw St. Misbehavin, I realized whether I build schools in Africa, which was her dream, she told me, but she said, even if I don't do that, and I just, you know, go out and help an elderly person cross the street with with a lot of groceries, and I help this lady today, then I'm enough. And I was like, that's it.
To put your goodwill to do the most, and have fun doing it, change the world, be kind to each other, and give me an F.
F.
Give me a U.
U.
Give me a N.
N.
Fun, big fun. Let's have some fun. Let's change the world. Let's feed each other. There's plenty to go around. That's the truth. Look at the philosophy of Buckminster Fuller and the World Games. We really got enough to go around if we just share it. That's the thing. Sharon and Karen, the Love Sisters. Here's to them. See the movie, and if it lights up for you, put some friends into your light and share it. And share the movie and share the love.
My name is Kristy Guevara-Flanagan, and I'm a documentary director. I'm currently working on the history of the universe as told by one woman. Well, people sometimes ask me, like, you must really be into superheroes, you must really be into Wonder Woman, and I really came to this project not at all from that place, but interested in comics and what they can tell us about who we are. They've been around as a form of popular, mass-produced culture since the turn of the century, and kind of lowbrow and originally made probably for like illiterate audiences because they could read the story through the images, and it just kind of fascinated me. And at the same time, I'd read a New York Times article talking about introducing Gail Simone, who was the writer of Wonder Woman at the time, and mentioning that it was the first time the series in its entire iteration since 1940 was actually written by a woman. And I just found that kind of mind-boggling, because here Wonder Woman was this great icon of empowerment for women, and yet if you looked at it more closely, she hadn't really ever been written by a woman. And but then I started researching Wonder Woman herself, you know, who did create her then, and where did she come from, and what was her initial story. And I found a very fascinating man behind the creation of Wonder Woman, and an interesting time for us as a culture in the 40s, and for women in the 40s as well. You know, you have Rosie the Riveter, you have women being asked by their government to step out of the home and work for the country, for the betterment of the country. And so it's really the first time women nationally left the home, left the domestic sphere, and really got a taste of what it was like to work outside of the home and to earn their own money, and to you know, just kind of change the playing field. Well, I think what's interesting at looking at comics to see what they tell us about who we are is you can really track decade by decade what are the cultural influences and how have certain art forms responded to them. I mean, when you think about serialized art forms like comic books and you know, soap operas, they have to produce so much material that they look for stories of what's actually happening, and that's another thing that I find fascinating. Even if you look at soap operas, like they were the first popular medium that really took on AIDS or divorce or abortion or issues like that, and you wouldn't think about that. You wouldn't think that soap operas or comic books would be kind of blazing the trail in that way in terms of covering things that have been initially taboo. So it's interesting to read comics in that way. What do they tell us about who we are, and how has that morphed over time through different sort of eras of our, you know, of our culture. And I think in the, you know, you have the 40s, women are out working, you have the creation of a character like Wonder Woman that was really popular. And then in the 50s and 60s, it's more about romance, and women are sent back home, they're not needed, there's no more war effort, and actually you have a lot of TV shows about women being at the center of the hearth and, you know, cooking for the family, and just kind of being these uber moms, actually, like Jean Cleaver's, this really intense vision of what it means to be a woman in the 50s. I mean, she always looked perfect, she made perfect food, she was the perfect mom. And then I think in response to all the civil rights movements and the different political movements in the late 60s, again, you have comics reacting to that and responding to that. And it wasn't necessarily in Wonder Woman quite yet, but in some other comics you have the beginning of talking about race relationships, and you have, you know, the X-Men that go into that a little bit. That was an allegory for, the mutants were an allegory for race relations, you could say. And there were other women at that time that were characters in popular culture that are kind of wearing some of the accoutrements of the civil rights movement and of the, you know, anti-war movement. Or I think Wonder Woman wasn't revitalized until the 70s, when Gloria Steinem put her on the very first cover of Ms. Magazine, and really that's when she became a feminist icon and an icon of empowerment. And at the time, though, in comic book form, Wonder Woman was, you know, working in a boutique, she was selling clothes, she completely lost her original powers as being a superhero and was more of this globe-trotting spy, sort of like Emma Peel, made of Emma Peel. for the Avengers, who was cool. She was ass kicking and all that, but that wasn't Wonder Woman. And here was this one of the few female superheroes that we had, and they completely lost her original myth, which was, you know, had very strong feminist message.
My name is Jeff Malmberg. I'm the director of a documentary called Marwencol that's currently in movie theaters across America and will be released on home video later on in 2011.
Everybody at one time or another wishes they had a double that could do the things that they could never do. So what I do is, with the alter egos, I tell my friends, you can be anybody you want, you can do anything you want in my town. Have as many girls as you want. I have 27 Barbies, so we gotta keep enough for the other dudes.
The short version is Marwencol is the story of a photographer who falls inside this imaginary world that he creates. And that, of course, leads to a question, which is, what exactly do you mean? Marwencol was attacked in the year 2000 outside of a bar in upstate New York, and pretty much left for dead. Was you know, in a coma, suffered tremendous brain injury, and when he came out of the coma, couldn't remember anything from his previous life. And in order to help him regain control of his life, control of his muscles, his memories, and to try and rebuild his life, he started creating this 1/6 scale town, this World War II town in his backyard that he called Marwencol. And so that's where we sort of meet Mark, and it goes on to from there into kind of a story of maybe what art is and what outsider art is and things like that. I subscribe to a magazine called Opus, which is an art magazine, and it's where Mark's photographs were first discovered and published about 5 years into him playing in this town every day and shooting these photographs of this town. And I saw these photographs and just was sort of immediately kind of captivated, and I kind of had to figure out, I had to know more, you know, and it's just one of those kind of thunderstruck moments where you just sort of had no choice, you know. And I just kind of went out and talked to him, and 4 years later, here I am. Once I realized that this was somebody who was really bringing me exactly what I had asked for, which was the truth of who he was, and that, you know, we were almost going to go on this experience together, kind of trying to figure out who he was in his previous life, while he was kind of simultaneously exploring who he was, who he wanted to be in his new life. I think there was that initial kind of fear of, you know, am I going to be able to handle that as a filmmaker and as a friend of this person? You know, am I going to be able to make a film that respects that and respects him and does him no harm and maybe helps him? And, you know, I felt like I could, and, you know, that's one of the reasons why maybe it took so long to complete, was that I wanted to really make sure that it was something that was that properly represented this person, my experience meeting this person, and also was both honest and kind, you know. I mean, it was kind of on and off, you know. I mean, that's the nice thing about documentaries, that you're, at least for this kind of story, you're kind of breathing with it, you know. You're kind of living with it. It's not every day, you know. Mark, I live in California. Mark's in upstate New York, so. But I would say I probably made about 16 trips out there, 16, 17 trips, something like that. And I shot about 150 hours, and you know, then culled that down into a 90-minute film. Yeah, you know, surprisingly, it wasn't as hard as I would have thought to get somebody who's so private to allow me inside his world, and I think that's probably for a couple of reasons. One, we got along really well, and he's somebody who I consider a friend, and I think he's, like a lot of friends that you meet in life, you're sort of instantly kind of drawn to one another, you know. And as soon as I met this guy, like, there was something special about him, and you know, so that was one. And for another, I think it was at a point in his life after the attack where he was ready to talk about it, and he was ready to open up to to someone, you know, and I sort of just happened to be the someone who showed up. And so it was kind of a point where he wanted to, as a victim, I think he wanted to kind of take control of the situation by verbalizing it and talking about it, and kind of, you know, laying, you know, kind of a stake in the ground of what had happened to him. And I just lucked into kind of showing up around that time. So it was sort of a process of both me trying to understand him and then him trying to lay out, you know, for the camera and for himself what had happened. Okay. Really interesting, because I think there's sort of this kind of golden rule that's starting to kind of tarnish in documentary of that you kind of have to keep objective distance or something. And, you know, I mean, that's for, you know, this is nothing new to kind of break that rule. I mean, if you look at Maisel Brothers movies from the 70s and 60s, I mean, they're doing that too. I mean, I think they're kind of saying, you know, we're not above our subject, we're next to our subject. You know, and just because we're telling the story doesn't mean we're higher than they are. You know, these are people that we want to understand on a human level, you know. So it was really like that. There were times that you would realize he was saying things to you as a friend, even though the camera happened to be on, and then it was your responsibility to not include those things. You know, as the story progressed, I mean, I was starting to realize I was putting very personal things into the film because it was representative of this journey that had gone on with Mark, and it was representative of sort of how Mark wanted to present himself to the world. So I would discuss those with him and say, you know, listen, I feel like this journey that we went on together was really about this, and that's kind of like personal. Are you okay with that? You know, and checking, and, you know, it's Mark really wants in his new life, his second life he calls it, to be open about who he is, and so it kind of fit in with that, you know, and it was cool. But I mean, it was also, you know, it's one of those things where you're not supposed to show footage to your subjects as if they're gonna like freak out and like, you know, they've never seen themselves on film and they'll run away scared or something, you know. And I mean, I found myself, Mark's a storyteller. I mean, if you think about it, he's, you know, he's got this world, and every day he's telling stories. I mean, he shoots more than I do. So I would show him scenes, you know, a couple years in, and say, you know, well, this is going to be a scene I'm doing about you when you go to the store every day, you know. And so I think he started to understand what I was doing, and it was nice to see that he was comfortable with that, you know. Not that it wasn't a completely pain-free process for him. I'm sure it was hard to open up, but I think he always felt like he had a responsibility to himself and to other people to show who he was, you know.
Was there,
you know, there were moments where I think you could tell he was getting a little frustrated, or maybe wasn't what he wanted to discuss at that point, but he would always sort of take a deep breath, and then he would have this phrase that he would always say to me, which was like, for duty and humanity, you know, which was sort of this idea that in his mind that he knew his story was important to tell, and he knew that it was his responsibility to tell it. And I think that speaks to the kind of person Mark is, which is really a kind person who has this sort of weird sense of like duty, that he knows his story is interesting and what's happened to him and why, and that it could benefit other people, you know. And I think I just happened to stumble across somebody who kind of had that sense about themselves. So I think it really helped him at times when maybe he was not particularly in the mood to be filmed. He sort of just kind of, you know, as his friend, I tried to not shove the camera in his face, but I mean, everybody has their bad days, and sometimes I needed to photograph that too, you know.
right.
When I showed him the film, before I finished it, I wanted to show him the movie and see how he felt about it. And that was actually my first question to him, is like, well, what do you want out of this film now that it's done? And his comment, which I think is telling, is that he said, you know, I want people with disabilities to see it. You know, so I mean, that's really where this guy's coming from. So we've played it at disability film festivals and things like that. And I think, you know, Mark's, again, somebody who really has a strong sense of like artistry to him, you know, to himself. I think he really is interested in sharing his story because I think he knows it's going to be beneficial. And, you know, he's gone to screenings with audience members, and I always felt like that would be a nice sort of last step in this process, was to have him see the movie with an audience and to kind of get that feedback. Because once I knew I was making this story about somebody that I cared about and that I found to be strong and brave and beautiful. I wanted them to feel that, him to feel that what that audience, came out of the movie feeling. I wanted Mark to feel that. So, that was a really interesting day and a really wonderful day for him to kind of have 200 people watch his movie with him and ask questions afterwards. And, I think it was really meaningful to him.
Did that change from the beginning?
Oh, totally. Yeah. I mean, it's completely changed what I wanted in the beginning for this and what I wanted in the end. And I think that that's what's great about documentary is it's not really up to you. You know what I mean? You sort of set a course and it's like the wind's going to take you where it takes you to some degree. And I mean, I guess in the beginning I wanted to make this really clever little 8-minute film, about somebody. No, seriously, it was going to be a short about this guy who had been beat up in real life and now was replaying that sort of in his imaginary world and the irony of that or something. But that was before I met him, and now 4 years later, having met him, to me, what I would like people to get out of it is just the chance to meet somebody really beautiful whom you might initially dismiss as being kind of strange or, but you come around maybe to finding that there's real strength there and that, there's a lesson there, and that was the same lesson I learned too, I always think it's interesting when you can sort of have the audience have the same lesson that you got. And my lesson on it was that, there's real beauty everywhere if you just pause to look, and it's certainly the case with Mark. I mean, he's really somebody who upends your expectations and surprises you at every turn.